Okay, hi. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon and welcome to this event, which is, we're calling
Okay, hi. Hello, everyone.
I'm going to have to mute that. This always happens.
And welcome.
There we go. Apologies for that, folks. That's, the technical glitch got out of the way at the start. So welcome, as I was saying, to the today's event, which is we're calling it the present future and the evolution of electronic dance music. The occasion marks the launch of a new book by Bloomsbury Publishing, which is called The Evolution of Electronic Dance Music. And we thought it would be a great opportunity to mark that occasion by bringing some of the industry's great minds together to discuss the current situation in the world of electronic dance music. The event brings together, I'm pleased to say, the worlds of the music industry and fusing it with academia. So the first part of this session is going to be a roundtable discussion with music industry people, followed by an event where we're actually talking about the new book. And that will be, the first section will be roughly an hour long, and we'll be following that with another hour discussing the book. But with no further delays, let me get on to our wonderful panel. And I'm just going to ask them to introduce themselves, even though they probably need no introduction. If you could just say who you are, please, folks, and explain your relationship with music and electronic dance music. Could we start with Tristan, please?
Thanks, Tony. Great to be here. My name's Tristan Hunt. I'm a regional manager at the Association for Electronic Music, which is a global voice for the industry. So we work across all of the different sectors, everything from technology through to rights and live. And we're really there to lobby for change and make sure that the best interests of the industry are put forward.
Brilliant. Silvia.
Hi, everyone. My name is Silvia Montello. I've worked in the music industry for about 30 years. During that time, I've worked with electronic labels and artists. I more recently joined the Association for Electronic Music with a small dance and electronic label that I launched called Remarkable. Have DJ'd, have done amateur promoting, etc. And very much flying the flag to make sure that artists and creators within the electronic music sector get paid and recompensed properly for their output, and that the various issues that are faced by them within the industry are resolved.
Brilliant, thank you, Silvia. Rohaan?
Just unmuting. Hello, happy to be here. My name's Rohaan. It's also my artist name. I've been producing for about 6-7 years now. And since then, my journey's kind of taken me to, I now own a sample pack company, which is giving artists affordable, royalty-free samples to use. And I'm also a marketing manager at School of Electronic Music. My main role there is to kind of guide upcoming artists, producers, DJs, sort of guide them from where they currently are to where they want to be, and sort of teach them, so when I was in that position, the next steps that I took, and sort of guide that process really to create a fulfilling career for these individuals, basically. And producing, DJing for about 6-7 years now. So yeah.
Great, and making great noises and getting a lot of attention, Rohaan. It's interesting. I have a relationship with the School of Electronic Music as well. It's you're a bit of a digital marketing expert as well, aren't you? Which obviously is particularly useful in the current environment. Jules, though you need no introduction, please do, because your role is quite diverse, really, isn't it? You've done so many things.
Yeah, I live, welcome. My name is Jules O'Riordan, aka in my DJ capacity, Judge Jules. I lead a parallel existence. I've been a DJ for well in excess of 30 years. I've done over 5,000 gigs. I was presenter on BBC Radio 1 for 15 years, made many records, been a sort of senior A&R for Universal group of labels, being a sort of promoter at quite a high level over a period of decades in Ibiza. And my sort of parallel life that I've existed under for the past 10 years, where I certainly don't use the name Judge, is as a partner in a specialist music law firm, Sound Advice, here in King's Cross, London, which is in Tile Yard. I represent all manner of different entities and individuals within the music business, but I've got obviously an extremely strong, probably, dare I say it, the strongest dance music specialist law practice in the world. I think now it's fair to say, without blowing too many trumpets. So I kind of see this industry from a multitude of different sides.
Yeah, it's great to, I can imagine, if I was a dance music producer, DJ, etc. I couldn't think of anyone who would understand better that perspective than you, and to sort of deal with those business aspects. So I'm not surprised to hear the success of your practice in the dance music realm. That's great. We've got Graham as well.
Hi, I'm Graham Massey. They call me a veteran. That's because I've been doing my group 808 States since 1987. So, and we're still ticking just about. Still making records, remixing, DJing, all those good things. Who else am I? I don't know. I've forgotten.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, I also noticed we've got Kamila here as well, and Martin and Kamila. We were expecting you in the next hour, but we'll just say hello to you first. And if you want to carry on watching us on YouTube Live, if that's okay. But Kamila is very industry active anyway. Whilst she contributed a chapter to the new book. I'm speaking for you, sorry, Kamila. You're also a journalist and have done all kinds of things as well, which is, again, one of those sort of converging worlds of academia and industry, which is, kind of the realm that I occupy as well. I'd like to try and sort of make this conversation. I think, as always, it kind of starts with a couple of questions from me. But if you wanted to, we could try and unmute the mics and try and get a good dialogue going, because I always find we tend to mine deeper if we do things that way, rather than me asking question, just asking question after question to individual. But I think it'd be good if we could we start off by one of the things that has just providing some context. One of the things that I think is probably going to take a lot of the time of this discussion, the thing that's affected us all, profoundly, is COVID. And I'm very interested to find out, we've got all of these perspectives here, music creators, producers, artists, DJs, lawyers, industry representatives, senior executives across the spectrum of music business, recorded music, and so on. How have your worlds changed? What is how is it different? How's it been different in the last 15 months? How has that progressed from what it was before, your activities, what you're doing? What's changes have you seen, and what has the impact of COVID been? Over that period of time. Would anyone like to jump in there? Jules, we've got Jules, go for it.
I guess as a lawyer come artist, you've got, on the one hand, you've got all the gigs one has lost. And I think it's very important to be even more mindful of everybody who sits behind the scenes within the live music industry, because they, to an even greater extent, have been forgotten about. But sort of kind of parking that, because I think that's a very big issue that's being well talked about by a number of bodies, including the Night Times Industries Association, etc. What I've noticed from my sort of perch, if you like, view from the mountaintop, representing lots and lots of different artists and entities within the electronic music community, is suddenly there's a whole bunch of artists, in many cases people who've been around quite a long time, who just paid lip service to making records, but actually didn't take it very seriously. They were treated as kind of lost leaders, ways of keeping the artistic sort of name of the individual in the public eye in order to generate that lucrative gig income. And suddenly people have had to completely readdress those values. And there are managers who I represent, and I certainly won't be mentioning any names, who almost kind of shocked me with their lack of knowledge of the kind of the broader industry, be it music publishing, be it kind of recorded music, because they've just been living off the metaphorical fat of the land in relation to live. So suddenly they've had to completely throw themselves in the studio, take it more seriously, take the deals more seriously, understand what publishing is. It's amazing how many people don't, even though actually at its essence it's relatively straightforward. So it's really forced an about turn amongst the huge amounts of players within the industry away from live and looking at the broader spectrum of income streams.
Yeah, I mean there was that backdrop where live had become and performance, had become so important as a revenue stream, and suddenly when it's gone, it gave rise to things like the fixed streaming campaign, which obviously resonates throughout the whole of the recorded music industry, but no less for electronic dance music, no less for that world. Have you seen the work, the nature of the work changing, Jules? What sort of have the contracts that you've been dealing with, clearly live has vanished. What's happened in terms of, what you actually spend your time doing?
Well, live was never, I think I can speak for all kind of specialist music lawyers, live was never a huge generator of legal work, because it's kind of, most live agreements, and I know this from being a DJ, most live agreements are kind of pro forma based. There's not, what you're negotiating ultimately, a bit of a rider and some fees and a few bits of kind of gubbins around the minutiae of the performance, but actually there's not that much that goes on legally. It's all kind of pre-done. So there was never, I wouldn't say there's been an about turn in that respect, but what I've really noticed is majors being super involved in dance music. I've always seen dance music, and I've noticed it throughout the various as being quite cyclical. You have these moments, and I think around 2015 was a very good, 2014, 2015 was a very good example of there being like almost continuous #1 records in the charts. Fast forward to now, for an assortment of reasons, probably COVID being, giving people a desire for feel-good music, has for the first time projected a lot of dance records back into the upper echelons of the charts, although we don't necessarily use the charts as the same metric now as we would have done in the pre-streaming era. The problem is, of course, you don't have the if you like, the soil in which the kind of more underground records can grow, which go on to be big hits that aren't necessarily obvious radio records. That at the moment they tend to be the bigger, more obvious radio hits, because radio, of course, now is the only playlist to a lesser extent, but radio is the only medium of exposure, whereas that whole organic growth that you had in dance music records through clubs and through festivals just isn't there right now. Yeah. So there's been a shift in what A&Rs have been looking for, and obviously, again, doing what I do and having a multitude of different dance music deals on my desk, I'm able to see, certain kind of trends within what's being signed. So hugely commercially successful, streaming numbers suddenly beginning to take off with dance music. But it's unfortunately some of those kind of more earthy, more underground records that still go on to do big things aren't getting the exposure that they otherwise would have done for obvious reasons.
Yeah. They're experienced on the dance floor and loved, initially from the dance floor. It's that there's a different sort of mode of reception, isn't there, and type of engagement with dance music if you can't experience it over big speakers with lots of other people. It's really quite an interesting point that you make. That's fundamental to the way the whole thing worked, isn't it, really? That the lack of the dance floors.
And Tony, if I might just jump in, sorry, Jules, I was just going to add to your point there that we've seen the importance of clubs, I think, to Jules's point about them being the seedbed for music, and just how vital they are as part of the music ecosystem. And obviously with COVID, live venues have been massively hit. And this focus that we've got at the moment on ensuring that those clubs, those venues that are this hotbed for creative talent continue is absolutely essential to the development of our industry post-COVID. So that's something that we're putting a lot of focus on at the moment.
And the word dance is key, isn't it, really? That's something that's largely done, communally, isn't it? Or historically was. And so it's really good to bring that point into sharp focus, I think.
If I can jump in there as well, I mean, touching on the point about streaming and the lack of the dance floor, for want of a better word. I mean, what I saw happening across labels last year when COVID hit was a combination of factors for the artists. I mean, some obviously had debut albums that had been scheduled for release during COVID, and then there was the decision about, well, do we go ahead and launch an album where we haven't got the opportunity to actually take that into the clubs and have that kind of level of engagement that we normally would, and the impact that had on the artists themselves, the impact it had on the labels in terms of, okay, we've got a lot of artists here who no longer have their live revenue stream. Therefore, the one thing that is available to them as an income stream is sales of their recorded music. And as a result of that, what you saw happening was this escalation of people releasing more and more music during COVID to try and claw some revenue in for their artists. And all that against the backdrop that it wasn't just in the electronic music sector that was happening, it was across the industry, where all the labels were going, shit, we need to make some money here. So let's see what releases we can put out digitally. And now we find ourselves in a situation where 60,000 tracks a day get released on Spotify. So if you're operating within the dance and electronic sector and you're not at that kind of top level, radio dance hit kind of area, it becomes more and more of a struggle just to get any sort of cut through, because there is so much competition. There's so much noise out there from within the electronic genres and without them as well. So I think that, the impact on revenue for the artists has been tremendous. The impact on just how labels have been trying to sort of manage that scenario of streaming income for their artists has been significant. And then for those that actually also look at an income stream from physical product, COVID did have a massive impact on that, certainly in the first few months of that, where there was huge disruption because of, lack of being able to manufacture vinyl or CDs, lack of being able to ship it around. So, it was a real kind of cluster of lots of different factors together in terms of just trying to maintain a kind of level of income from recorded music in whatever format that was, and make sure that artists were still being supported. And I know from discussions with a number of labels, some of them had artists that ended up taking jobs as Amazon delivery drivers because that was the only way they could actually find enough ancillary income to pay their rent and put food on the table. So it's, we can't underestimate that the huge impact that this has all had on the livelihood of an electronic musician or DJ.
Going off the back of what you just said there, it's funny, I actually released my debut album the first week of lockdown. So I was like directly punched in the gut by that. But it's funny because what we had to do with that, we had to adapt quickly. So I had like an Asia tour, a Europe tour, and dates in the UK ready to go for that month, which obviously got postponed till whenever. So to quickly adapt, luckily what came along was the live stream scene. And because my album was released on an American label, people were doing all these live streams left, right, and center, in which there was a donation link for each person's set. So through doing these live streams, I was then able to actually build back revenue, which I would have received each show. And through like the snowball effect of that, some of the live streams were getting like close to like 20,000 views at one time, which then through donations, the companies that were running these were then able to pay a fee for each artist on the live stream. So obviously it's not ideal, but I feel like what came of that.
So they were using donations to, I mean, there were clearly some sort of quite quick responses, and timing served advantageously or disadvantageously in many circumstances as well. It sounds like you were able to recover or make that work. Graham, if memory serves, were you not planning a lot of live activity, sort of culminating?
Yeah, with the lockdown coincided with our tour. The thing about a tour is that there's a lot of momentum behind setting up a tour with the release of a record, and the whole cycle took about 3 years. So yeah, there is a point of I got quite despondent early in the lockdown over that, because you can't build that momentum easily, and you feel out of control of your ability to contribute to that energy, because it's all in the hands of agents and they're moving gigs around, and you start to feel like detached from the whole industry thing as an artist. You can only do the creative part and load the gun and wait to be fired, And so yeah, I've actually, I'm trying to think. Everyone's been quite positive about the lockdown here, and I'm glad somebody can be positive about it, because I've actually been quite the opposite. I'm trying to think of something positive to say about it, but I can't. Yeah.
Well, I think the timing seems to have been quite bad for you, because you were on an album cycle, weren't you? Where you'd kind of spend a lot of time creating an artistic work, and that's, you're a band as well, or there's a bit of a different machinery to something, to a band rather than a DJ producer, perhaps.
Yeah, it's a lot of people. It's a fairly big team once you break it down, of people that you're kind of letting down as the head of the thing, and you need to look after your team. I mean, there's people like our agent who'd done so much hard work in setting all these things up, but and during the course of lockdown, he actually died from COVID in the middle of all this. So it was like there wasn't a positive spin I could put on it, in those first few months. And then, things became about what you can do from home, which is always great with electronic music. It's like you can then start operating again from your imagination. And, I've found lockdown to be about concentrating on remixes more, and composition, and special projects, like soundtracks and things like that. So gradually, it took a bit of a blow and then a pickup, about probably about a year into it, actually, before I got my head back into it.
But you're a long-established artist with, I suppose, perhaps an established working methodology. Prior to that.
I say, I mean, I've probably not had a year. I've never had a year off since there was since the 1970s, really. In terms of music, this has been so unusual to stop playing music with people for a year. And I don't find the online thing very particularly attractive. I don't think it serves the kind of music that we make. Because it's all about physical sound moving, and that whole thing. We turned a lot of things down. A lot of people trying to talk us into doing live stream stuff, but I just know that it's not a strength. And the
music's very functional, isn't it? And I think, depending on perhaps how you've been used to consuming music. A small screen and small speakers as a medium. If it's all you've got, you work with it, don't you? But it's not necessarily. It's not like going to an 808 state show, where you've got.
I mean, I've done some other side project things as broadcasts. My experimental side. So.
But of course, there is that, we can't ignore the fact, you mentioned your agent, passing, incredibly sad, and, a very sad reminder about, the profound impact of COVID. People have lost their lives, but,
and the accumulation of knowledge within the industry, like those people are all based on personal relationships, a lot of work on the ground, a lot of traveling, a lot of global traveling for many years that set up those relationships that allow you to be on those events.
Yeah.
These are not easily replaceable things.
Yeah,
such value in those people.
But I mean, our rebuilding has to, we have to take great care in the rebuilding, don't we?
Yeah.
And move, I suppose, cautiously.
I see it as like, I think there's being around some younger people, it's almost like a bit of a solar system. Some things have a small orbit of like local clubs doing really exciting things, and new up and coming people just doing it for the love of it. That's where we started, but eventually you end up in this wider orbit. You become like a Jupiter or something, and it takes a few years to go around the sun. That's kind of there's all these different concentric circles of activity within in electronic music, and they do interact, and it is a feedback system, and the interruption of that feedback system has been very notable, because you can't, you can do so much in a vacuum, but it's about being out there, conversations, bumping into people, young people seeing older things and vice versa, that mix up of what you get in out there on the ground,
Yeah, of course, there's the sort of weird converging analog and digital worlds as well, aren't there? That kind of work quite differently as well. Yeah. Tristan, can I take the opportunity to ask you? So, the Association for Electronic Music. I think it's a great thing, and I'm a member, so that's kind of illustrates my, my endorsement and belief in it. And as a member, I regularly see communications, of the great work that you're doing, but you're kind of, a point, at the intersection of the issues and concern, representing people, seeking to resolve, big issues, like the streaming, and like, the closure of the clubs. With, the clubs seem to have had a particular hard time, through the COVID position, as a part of the hospitality industry. They were closed, and even when other parts of the hospitality sector were reopening, they had to remain closed. They were seen as particularly problematic, I think, by policymakers. So could you talk about some of the the work that you've been doing, and some of the issues that you've been seeking to address, because you work with organisations like the Nighttime Industry Association to try and resolve these issues, don't you?
We do, and I think just working back from Graham's point that he was making about how an awful lot of artists have found this a very difficult time, being in isolation. They've been away from clubs, they've been away from live audiences. That's been very challenging for people, and we do have to just stop for a second and say, well, actually, this has been very hard for an awful lot of people, and this process of coming out of lockdown will take a while for those individuals to get back into that groove. In terms of the live side of things, yes, we've been working with the NTIA, several other organisations on that topic, with a view to getting things reopen and going again. We're now in a position where we're starting to see some events happening in continental Europe. Things in the States have started to move forward. We're obviously a global looking organisation, so yes. We're looking at the UK and then obviously beyond our borders. So there are some green shoots starting to happen, and there's some quite good policies being put in place in terms of allowing events to reopen again in a way that is safe, and that creates a potential model that the rest of the industry can use going forward, and that we can adjust depending on how infection rates develop over the months ahead. So we are optimistic about where things are going, but we're very much about doing that in a way that is safe.
Absolutely. We obviously had the Liverpool trials at the last bank holiday, the pilots at Circus, where, you know, I think over a weekend 6,000 people were brought together, and there's going to be monitoring of the impact of that. But it seems, you know, as you mentioned, the sort of transnational nature of the industry, and different countries are in different positions with regards to things like, you know, the vaccine. You know, we're hopeful that our vaccine program and you know, the impact of the vaccine is going to dramatically reduce the spread of COVID and protect people. You know, so that's, you know, it will be interesting to see what the data says from the Liverpool pilots, I think. But it would definitely, but I mean, I remember at the start, you know, early on in COVID, you were doing things like getting money, raising money, and distributing that, because of course early on we had, you know, things like the Cultural Recovery Fund, which you know, it appeared that not a lot of institutions that were dealing with electronic music were, you know, recipients. I think there was, you know, some high-profile ones like, you know, the Warehouse Project and Ministry of Sound and so on. But in relation to the actual numbers, you know, I think the UK's largest operator of nightclubs at the time was called Deltic, and I don't think they received anything. And you know, I know other operators who have, you know, multiple venues that you know, got the odd thing, but you know, things. You know, what are your thoughts on the sort of how things have worked through for the electronic dance music venues, I suppose, you know, the opportunities for live experiences, and of course in turn, you know, that impacts on the wider picture, doesn't it, as well?
Absolutely. Huge credit to Youssef and his team for the event which they ran in Liverpool over the weekend. It was done with huge thought and preparation over many months to organise something that was very thorough in the testing that was put either side of the event, and as you say, we're waiting to hear back on those results, but very well organised, and potentially a great template for the industry going forward. You touched on what happened sort of when COVID hit. We were fortunate to work with members like Beatport, who I'm sure a lot of people on this call saw their Reconnect series, and the first Reconnect series raised a considerable amount of money, about $100,000 of which came to AFEM, which we were then able to distribute to our membership. So an awful lot of people, Tony, to your point about the fact that some people were given money from government grants and other government-based resources. They did get some funding and others didn't. So we were able to support a lot of the members within AFEM, and we have over 250 members across 20 countries. But certainly with those members that had not had access to funding or hadn't been eligible, or they'd fallen through the cracks and hadn't been able to get to that income that was generated from the fundraising initiative that Beatport did, we were then able to distribute that to member companies who had been directly impacted by COVID. So they had successful businesses, things were going really well up until that point, but then perhaps they'd had to lay off staff, or they were in commercial risk as a result of that. So we were able to distribute those funds and resources. hopefully, as things start to pick up again, people are going to become ever more self-sufficient, as we've seen. We've seen areas of the industry that have done exceptionally well, or they've performed at a level which we were wonderfully surprised to see, especially around those companies that work in technology, that produce equipment, and those that are responsible for rights. So often people working within publishing and the recorded side have actually seen some positive signs. It is, as you say, the live sector that's been hit the most. But working back to the Liverpool event, hopefully we're starting to see some paradigms put in place that can actually be adopted and used going forward by other events.
Some restoration, Silvia, in the world of recorded music, because I know you have a very and digital, what have you seen over the last 15 months, and what's the current picture?
Well, as I touched on earlier, I think the current picture is still, the challenges because of volume of releases and cut through, seeing artists having to be a lot more creative in terms of how they're actually reaching their audiences, when the only way to do that really is online still at the moment. One of the areas I actually wanted to touch on around the digital was live streaming, as you sort of touched on that earlier, and the proliferation of live streaming that happened through COVID. And as Rohaan said, there are certainly there's live streaming opportunities that enabled artists or DJs to potentially get a payment, whether via a sort of tip jar or some other sort of payment mechanism. But there's a lot of work that is still being done under the radar, and AFEM in particular, around making sure that actually the music that gets played in DJ set live streams in particular gets the money kind of flowing through to the right places. And I suppose, double-edged sword, one of the good things that happened last year was the fact that live streaming has become now, I think, an established part of the mix and will continue to be an established part. But that's also shone a light on the fact that a lot of the way in which the revenues work from live streaming is still to be identified and clarified and really sorted out for the creators of the music. So a lot of people, I think, didn't realize that a lot of the major platforms, such as Facebook and Twitch, etc., just didn't have the licenses in place to make sure that if your music got played by a DJ in a live stream set that maybe had hundreds of thousands or even millions of people viewing it and consuming it, the mechanism still wasn't there necessarily for you as that artist or creator to earn any money from that, because those licenses are incredibly complex. They tend to work on a territorial basis, and a lot of the platforms simply didn't have them in place. So, I say it's a double-edged sword, because I think the fact that it's shone a light on this as being a really important piece for us to fix, specifically for electronic and dance music, is that there is a will, and a collaborative will, through a lot of the industry organisations that need to make these changes to actually get this sorted now. Live streaming is not going to go away, and the use of someone else's music by a DJ playing out, that's a given within our sector. So we just need to make sure that the people that are making enormous tunes that get played by enormous DJs in successful sets actually see the right recompense for that. Association for Electronic Music have a sort of get played, get paid strand of the work that we are doing there, which is a very important piece. And that's really going to be lobbying for those sorts of changes in the way in which the licenses are set up for the collection agencies to, involving platforms, publishers and record labels alike. So if anything good comes out of things on the sort of, the digital side of music consumption, I'm, for one, really hoping that that's going to be unlocked, because that should be a really important revenue stream for artists, writers, producers, creators within this sector, which really hasn't been open to them in the best possible way up to this point.
We had, there's the backdrop of Article 17, isn't there? I mean, I'm mindful we've got a brilliant lawyer here as well, and of course, who will have intimate knowledge of sort of how all these deals are working and how complex they can be. But Article 17, not adopted by the UK in the context of Brexit. Incidentally, Silvia, I thought you wrote a brilliant article about Brexit, which people will have to put a link to that, in this later. But yeah, it's interesting and complicated, isn't it? As the industry evolves, a greater level of activity in this area. We weren't prepared for it, really. Is there resistance, do you think, to is there anyone resisting this, or is it simply that we weren't ready for it and we're now working it out?
I find it really, it's almost repulsive that the social media companies, particularly Facebook, will leave up foul, sort of racist, kind of far right content, but will whip down DJ live streams within a moment. I've been doing live streaming every Saturday throughout the pandemic. I've got some incredible numbers, especially when I was still able to do it on Facebook. It's not that I'm not paying for rights because I don't want to. There isn't the mechanism if you go via the majority of the platforms. If an organization as big as YouTube is capable of clearing all rights, then so are Facebook, but they don't do it. It just seems like, whichever way they're just not a very nice bunch of people. That's not a very legal thing to say. It's a very from the heart comment to make.
Yeah.
Really, they came out with a blaze of glory about Facebook Live 5 or thereabouts years ago, meanwhile not having cleared any rights. And the task of clearing particularly recorded rights on a global basis is a monumental one, but a small number of entities have managed to do it. Spotify have managed to do it. YouTube have managed to do it, but Facebook just washed their hands of it, as far as I'm aware at this stage anyway, which I find quite disagreeable, to put it mildly.
It is very disagreeable, and I think, if you don't mind, a slight kind of dive into Facebook and music generally. When Facebook launched and actually did deals with both the majors and the independents, it was done very much on a kind of, music has been consumed on our platform. We haven't had the mechanism in place to be able to track it on a proper per usage basis. So what we'll do is we will pay a bunch of money to kind of cover the past usages. And then the label needs to kind of take this chunk of money and try and work out on a market share basis how much of that to actually pay back to their artists. So it's a really inexact science on a platform like Facebook. And that is still the case as far as I know. So when they launched a few years ago, the idea was always to actually develop some mechanism for being able to do that sort of tracking that Spotify do, or Apple Music do, or YouTube do. And then COVID and live streaming came along, which just added that layer of complexity that they were so not ready for, because they weren't even ready to really do a kind of per track streaming recompense bit. They never set themselves up to be a streaming platform in the first place, and they certainly weren't ready and weren't able to handle live streaming in a proper way. So it started off with them doing the takedowns that Jules was talking about, because to preserve their relationships, especially with the majors, they didn't want to be slapped with DMCA notices every 5 minutes by Sony or Universal or Warner saying, stop that, we haven't given you permission to be using this track in that way. So what would happen is that they just end up pulling the whole thing down, or that you'd end up having those horrible gaps in between a DJ set where suddenly everything would go blank for a minute because their recognition kicked in, and they were suddenly like, oh my God, we're going to get a notice. We're going to get somebody breathing down our necks and slapping a notice on us. And it made for a really, really bad consumer experience. So I think they got their fingers burned really badly from that. Yeah, I agree, Jules. I don't think they're very nice people on many levels, for exactly the reasons that you've said. And I don't know to what extent they're really going to look at this area and try and resolve it and try and build the technology that will allow them to do it properly. And I'm firmly of the view that if you want to do a live stream, do it on a platform that pays everybody that needs paying properly. The Beatports of the Mixclouds of this world, because Mixcloud have absolutely nailed it in terms of making sure that every part of that chain gets properly recompensed. Others are looking at it and others will follow. Whether Facebook are one of them, time remains to be seen. They've got so many other fish to fry. I wouldn't be holding my breath. But you know, going back to your point, Tony, is there resistance? Probably, because to put that technology in place is going to take a while and will take some investment as well. So then it's a case of, do they have the will to do that? Is it really part of their overall bigger strategy? Because music is only a tiny part really of what the Facebooks of this world are wanting to do.
It is, but a lot of music creators, you know, have become quite dependent or use heavily that platform to interact with their audiences, which makes it particularly, you know, unfortunate and particularly painful. I mean, I actually know people who have are so badly, because of the nature of their music activities, have been very, you know, badly impacted. You know, it's, you know, breaking their the tools that they have access to are just taken away from them. And they're constantly being, you know, having their music taken down, and you know, it's quite painful to, you know, to hear these conversations. But I mean, I think again, this is an example of when we have these conversations, it brings into sharp focus something that is in particular a problem that, you know, needs an issue that needs to be resolved. And I think it's great that people don't sit on the fence about their feelings about, you know, Facebook, you know, who certainly can be controversial.
I genuinely think they're becoming less relevant now to a lot of musicians and a lot of creators in terms of building or sustaining an audience, or using them as a platform to let people know that their music's out there, or to do advertising or whatever. And you know, I'm personally seeing that and getting that feedback from a lot of people within the last few months, especially.
Yeah.
It just feels like people are moving to other social platforms or other ways of engaging a fan base, because just for the variety of reasons, Facebook isn't really working for them in the way that it was seen to be even 2 or 3 years ago. So,
Rohaan, who are you? You know, what are your thoughts on this? You know, you're chipping away at the you know, younger end of the scale. What does your audience? What are your experiences and how you connect with your audience?
Yeah, it's interesting what you said about Facebook then. Even in the space of, I feel like 2 years, I've now gone from being extremely focused on building my presence through my artist page on Facebook to now it's simply just a chore. Like whatever I shout about on socials, I will just put it up on Facebook just because that's just another avenue. It's just another hook in the pond. Yeah, I just don't see Facebook as a good promotional tool now. And one example being is a single that I released recently with our distributors. We run an advert. The advert was through Facebook. It also covered Instagram, in which there was some miscommunication somewhere between us launching that, in which then all of my profiles just got removed off the face of the earth. So any profile to do with Facebook, so that was Instagram, Facebook, and like my artist page was gone. In which then we then had to go, obviously I had no way to contact them then. I had like no proof of anything, in which we then had to then re-go through our distributors that then had to put back in a claim, all for just a simple advert that had my own music in, which I had the rights to. So yeah, to go and sort of back onto what everyone else has said here, yeah, I'm just not the biggest fan of Facebook. That being said, unfortunately, my platform of choice is Instagram, which Facebook do own. I personally enjoy that platform. I find it's easy to engage with people. I can build a fan base easier on Instagram, and just engage with people and get my message and my sort of brand as an artist across a lot easier. Again, Facebook owns it, so there's still issues, but yeah, I personally use Instagram.
Well, I mean, we've been forced into a digital world, haven't we? You know, we've had no choice about that. So I guess it's become more important and more pressing, and it would be great if these matters could be resolved. But maybe that's another challenge for the Association for Electronic Music, Tristan. You know, something else, yet another thing to work on and try and address.
It is, Tony, and this is, I mean, very much an ongoing conversation that we've been having with these platforms, and the issues that have been raised today are sadly correct, which is a shame, because there's a huge opportunity here for everyone to prosper, and that's not being seized at the moment is frustrating.
Well, I've just noticed the time with time running low, but I mean, we've had some, you know, amazing thoughts and views, you know, and experiences relayed from our panel. But could we have a look? You know, has anyone seen any, you know, looking to the future, any innovation that is exciting? You know, we obviously want to rebuild the social consumption of music for the industry, and you know, wheels are in motion for that. I think it's fair to say. Would you agree? You know, what have we seen? What, you know, I mean, Silvia sort of said, you know, we were talking about some good that may have come out of it. What do you think, folks? Is there anything that you've seen that is showing promise in particular? You know, in the evolving picture
that I've seen, I guess it's interesting. Well, one thing I've seen is because of COVID, people's phone usage is up astronomically high, so more people's eyes are on social media. Good or bad, one thing that I've seen is artists or students that are coming through the school that may not have had the eyes on their work previously, or had the attention that their music deserved. Now that more people are actually looking at social media, I've started to see these artists grow their fan base a lot quicker, because anything that they put out is now being seen by a greater amount of people. And some people have been producing for like 5 or 6 years prior, and all of a sudden COVID happens, more eyes on social media, their work is now being seen by more people. Yeah, is one little positive I've seen of it.
I think Silvia mentioned there's a lot of noise out there with the amount, you know, and I think, you know, I'd be interested to know what you think about electronic dance music. Has a lot of, whilst it has a very high profile component, you know, in this sort of EDM realm, electronic dance music encompasses many different genres and niches and sub niches. You know, are you suggesting that they are easier to sort of mine and profile, the smaller ones? You know, but with all this noise, you know, one of the things that is very important is to have techniques and obviously brilliant music that rises above the noise, I guess.
If I can jump in, there is one area that I've seen that is a good innovation that, you know, maybe has come out a little bit more from COVID, but artists and labels looking at other revenue streams for music, and looking at the area of sync and production music, and actually having music that is commissioned or written specifically for TV or film or games, and that sort of sync area. I saw an article just yesterday, actually, Deadmau5 and his label Mousetrap have just set up a specific arm of their label in conjunction with one of the production music arms of one of the majors, specifically looking at being able to get music that is targeted, rather than targeted as sort of, you know, the traditional commercial release, but actually really commissioned and targeted towards those sorts of areas. And this, it feels like it is an area of growth for dance and electronic There are certainly, you know, I work for a company now that looks at production music, and I can see that some of the genres that they're looking into in particular are some of the more niche genres, you know, sort of drum and bass, and you know, sort of, and hip hop in particular are ones that are really taking off, and that can just, what that can do for artists is actually give them a sort of a more reliable revenue stream to potentially supplement what they're doing on the commercial side of things as well. Because if you're commissioned for something, there's a guaranteed upfront payment, and then there's sorts of, you know, sort of quite long tail guaranteed payments that come through the usage of the music, because, you know, TV productions and films tend to travel in terms of time, but also territory. So that's something that can be just an extra focus that people can have a think about in terms of ways of hopefully making a living out of their music.
There was an interesting article in Music Week talking about the prospects or the potential of the gaming world for musicians, which, you know, you've mentioned there, really. And there was some research done by Media that was, you know, really profiling, you know, gamers as high users of music, and also people who are prone to spending money in different ways, and how we can migrate, you know, this notion of how we might migrate into this realm more successfully in terms of music creators. We're pretty much out of time, folks, but is there anything that anyone else would like to sort of add before we move on to the next part of this? Okay, well, look, I can't thank you enough. It's been amazing to bring, you know, your brilliant minds together. You know, I can't help but feel we need to do some more of this as well. You know, it's been really enlightening, and I'm sure a lot of people who are watching it will have got a lot from this. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to close this part of the stream, so I think we're going to go dark now for a moment, and we'll assemble the people for the next part of it. But thanks, Rohaan, thanks, Jules, thanks, Tristan, thanks, Silvia, and thanks, Graham.
Hello. Welcome to the launch for The Evolution of Dance Music, a book which will be published by Bloomsbury next month in June. And we're lucky enough to have with us many of the authors from the book. We're looking forward to a discussion this afternoon where you'll be talking about your own chapters, but perhaps before we introduce ourselves, I'll just kind of give an overview of what the book is about. Essentially, it explores the place of electronic dance music in popular music. It looks at the ambiguities, variations, transformations, and manifestations of EDM, its fragmentation into different genres, the way it's spread across the globe, changes in technology, and changes in the way in which the music is consumed. It focuses on the current state of the music, its future, and its boundaries, the boundary between EDM and other forms of electronic music and other forms of pop music. And it accounts for the rise of EDM in places that are often overlooked, such as Russia and Eastern Europe. And it looks also at the multimedia and visual aspects of EDM. So it covers a whole range of aspects of electronic dance music. And we have some of the authors of those chapters here with us today. We also have a foreword by Graham Massey, which gives us a neat link into the previous discussion. Graham wrote a foreword for the book, which kind of, I suppose, charted his seminal contribution to the genre from its earlier days. So the book's divided into three parts. The first part being about the technological production of EDM, and also the discursive kind of the character of the discursive commentary around its nomenclature and its definitions of genres. The second part's about EDM stars and EDM stardom, if that isn't a contradiction in terms. And the third is about the various dance music scenes through which the music is disseminated. So, welcome to everyone. It's great to have you here. Perhaps we could start by introducing ourselves, and I'm going to ask Ewa to introduce herself. Ewa as not only a contributor to the book, but also one of its editors.
Yes, indeed. I'm one of the three editors of the book. The other two are Les and also Tony. And I also wrote a chapter about the transformation of dance scene in Poland from the time when Poland regained independence after the First World War till the current day. And maybe it's worth mentioning that it's my third book about electronic music, maybe not electronic dance music, but electronic music at large. As before, I published a monograph about electronic music, popular electronic music in Vienna, and just recently my second book about popular electronic music in Poland was published, both books by Routledge.
Thank you. Perhaps we could each introduce ourselves briefly before we come back and ask you to talk more in a more detailed way about the chapter that you've contributed to the book. So this is a very strange situation. We're on Zoom. We're not on a real planet. We're on planet Zoom. So I'm going to ask you to introduce yourselves in the order that I can see you, going from left to right, which might not necessarily be the order that other people see this. So, Jeremy, can I start with you? Perhaps you just, in a few words, say who you are and what your connection is to this field.
Yeah, hi, my name is Jeremy Smith, and I teach music theory at the University of Louisville. So my background is as a classically trained performing musician, but I've done research on the analysis of EDM and popular music in general. So yeah, I'm writing about music theory and analysis of EDM, and my chapter in the book focuses on deadmau5.
Thank you. And Tristan.
Hey everybody, my name is Tristan Kneschke. I'm a journalist, having written for a bunch of online publications and a few print ones. I used to be the managing editor for this super small electronic and cultural website called Subrewind, and I've written extensively about video for a couple of sites as well. My chapter in the book is also about deadmau5, and I use him as kind of a sort of guiding light for a lot of the trends in EDM. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris, would you introduce yourself, please?
Hello, I'm Chris Inglis. I'm a musicologist. I received my doctorate a couple of years ago, specializing in the electro swing genre, which I will talk about more in a bit because it relates to my chapter. And I'm currently working at the BIM Institute in Bristol.
Thank you. Stuart.
Hiya, my name is Stuart Moss. I'm a senior lecturer at Leeds Beckett University, where I teach on the music industry's management and entertainment management programs. My chapter is about the evolution of electronic dance music spaces in Leeds, beginning in the 1980s, right up to the COVID pandemic, really, looking at the different influences internally and externally that have helped shape the development of electronic dance music and the venues and the scene in Leeds.
And Kamila.
Thanks, Les. Hi, everyone. My name's Kamila Rymajdo. I'm a music journalist and journalist more generally. I write for magazines like Mix Mag, DJ Mag, Vice, Dazed, ID. I'm based in Manchester, and a lot of my academic and journalistic writing is about Manchester club culture, as well as other northern places, such as Blackpool. I've written about Blackpool grime. That's one of my academic interests previously, but I also write quite a lot about women. And my chapter is about ageism and sexism in Manchester's club culture.
Great, thank you very much. And just because we haven't heard from Tony in this section, perhaps I'll just ask him to introduce himself.
Well, hi, I'm Tony Rigg, and I'm the guy who, because we were so busy talking with our industry panelists on the previous section, I'm the guy who forgot to deal with any questions. So I'd just like to publicly apologise. But I will be keeping an eye on the questions if you have any for this panel. And we again have a wonderful assembly of brilliant minds and experts, as you've just heard, in the area of electronic dance music.
So one of the things that was great about your session earlier, Tony, was that you managed to avoid the curse of Zoom, which is that people say something and then someone else says something else, but there's no connections going on. Actually, your discussion was really, really well connected, and I'd like to see if we could emulate that. It seems to me that we've got an awful lot of themes in common in the interests of our guests here. And so I'm going to be quite ambitious and suggest that perhaps we talk initially about our own chapters, but then open up the discussion and perhaps start to have actual conversations and dialogues with each other as though we were in the pre-pandemic, pre-COVID world. Do you think that's a possibility? Should we have a go at that?
We could try. Everyone's being really polite and not wanting to talk over each other.
No, I know. Well, I think if we get a bit of, discussion, debate and discourse going, then a little bit of time lag and a little bit of talking over each other is a price that's well worth paying. So I'm going to go, perhaps I'll go back to Ewa to start off with, to talk about her chapter. Are you okay with that?
Yes. In my chapter, actually, I took a wider view on electronic dance music, namely, I looked at dance music in general, which also brings us to this issue of, electronic music, EDM versus dance. These days, the term dance is perhaps used as widely in relation to electronic dance music as the other terms. But how I used it, I argued that this term is pertinent. Also because it's worth looking at dance music before electronic instruments were introduced, and look at this wider history of dance music through history of one country, my own country, Poland. So I started with the period after the First World War, when Poland regained independence after over 100 years. And my argument was that dance was actually one of the expressions of joy of this event. So dance music was extremely popular in Poland during the time and was present everywhere. All social classes were dancing. Dance music was also shown widely on Polish cinema. Almost every film of this period had dancing scenes included. And although people of different classes danced in different places, there was really no sense of any stigma related to specific styles or types of dancing. But I argued that this changed after the Second World War, where paradoxically the country became socialist, so egalitarian, but at the same time, other divisions were introduced to actually reflect different types of capital people enjoyed then. And I argued that dance music after the Second World War in Poland started to be looked at with some prejudice because it was associated with cheap entertainment rather than something which needs education, which needs refinement. And this was reflected, for example, in the way discotheques operated in Poland from the 70s, namely the fact that metropolitan, we can say, trendy discotheques avoided disco music. They played very often prog rock. And also there was a drive. My God, telephone is.
So this proves that it's a live broadcast.
It has to happen though, doesn't it? It was Peter Hook last time we did this. His phone was going on, and the same person kept ringing in the background until they got an answer.
Sorry, you can see that it's live. So, sorry about it. Just to go quickly, as I don't want to take too much time with this description. But my point is that actually, after the Second World War in Poland, dance music was a stage of a battle about taste. This is also reflected in the history of the most popular Polish dance genre, namely disco polo, which is the most popular music genre at all, on the whole in Poland, but is very criticized, basically rejected by cultural elites because it is associated with the culture of the province, of people who are not very educated. And in this chapter, I try to sort of argue that basically that is a wrong attitude, so to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Ewa. I think that there was a couple of themes in that I think it would be interesting to pick up in later discussion. One of them you raised was the obviously the battle about taste, which I think is going to occur in some of the other discussions, but also the way in which there's a kind of interpenetration between pre-electronic dance music and electronic dance music. So in Britain and America, we saw disco, which was sort of pre-electronic, morph through Giorgio Moroder and others into electronic dance music. But then as sampling comes in, we start to see electronic dance music sampling those pre-electronic forms of dance music of various sorts. So, you know, perhaps that's something we can kind of park to pick up later in later discussion. So I'm going to kind of follow the same pattern as I followed before when we did the introductions. That gives you a clue about who I'm going to ask to talk next. So Jeremy, would you tell us something about the chapter that you've written for this book?
Yeah, sure. So my chapter discusses various aspects of Deadmau5's career, that is Joel Zimmerman, the Canadian producer Joel Zimmerman. And I'm looking at Deadmau5's career through the lens of authenticity. Authenticity has been widely discussed in writings about popular music. It's been espoused as an important concept, but also profoundly criticized. So I just want to clarify at the start that I'm not saying it's a perfect concept or something that can be objectively measured, but I still think authenticity is a useful concept to discuss as a general concept for EDM stars, since it does have meaning for fans and for other people in the community. So I'm focusing primarily on Alan Moore's conception of authenticity of expression. And that occurs when a musical creator, quote, succeeds in conveying the impression that his or her utterance is one of integrity and that it represents an attempt to communicate in an unmediated form with an audience. I also draw on the work of John Gunders, and his concept of authenticity includes being opposed to commercialism, being natural, not being artificial, and also being creative in the sense of expressing originality. So my chapter is arguing that deadmau5 maintains a balance between corporate branding and individual artistry. And I discuss choices that Zimmerman makes to maintain this balance in his recorded music, live performances, and also in his internet content. So firstly, in terms of musical techniques, deadmau5 portrays authenticity by composing in a wide variety of styles, and also by being innovative with the formal structure of EDM tracks. And on his albums, he sometimes gives the audience clearly structured tracks with multiple breakdowns, buildups, and drops, but other times he really plays with audiences' expectations by tinkering with that formula. For example, on his most recent studio album from 2016, only half of the tracks have the typical EDM structure and progressive house style that made him famous, while the other tracks are more experimental, having a looser structure or not being EDM tracks at all. One quotation that I find interesting from deadmau5's masterclass that he made, he talks about his belief that obvious buildups and climactic drops are a clear way of instructing an audience, but he says that, quote, there are other ways to invoke moments of intrigue or hype or mystery without having to blatantly illustrate it. So I think he's saying that drops, which is a technique, the climactic start of a main section in an EDM track, he's saying that drops can be used in an authentic and creative way, but that drops should not be just inserted out of obligation or necessity in an inauthentic way, which he believes that some artists do. So deadmau5 acknowledges that his style is continuously transforming as an artist, but also that he needs to continue creating clear progressive house tracks in order to connect with his fans and not alienate his fans. Another section of my chapter looks at how deadmau5 portrays authenticity in live performances. And for this, many of my observations come from a live performance that I attended of deadmau5 performing on the Cube version 3 tour in October 2019, just a few months before the pandemic. So he portrays authenticity in the performance by conveying a sense of liveness, naturalness, technical proficiency, and also originality. Mark Butler says that in order for a performance to be conceived of as authentic, audience members must feel as if they're part of a unique one-time occasion. So deadmau5 takes various steps to show that and communicate with fans in a seemingly unmediated way. There are some aspects, of course, of the show and of the tour that are highly commercialized, but within that framework, he portrays authenticity by displaying his musical performance techniques and his control over the spectacle, as well as directly communicating with the audience through body language, on-screen messages, verbal speech, and also musical actions like teasing the audience and playing with their expectations.
I think there's
sorry, go ahead.
No, there's just so much interesting to talk about here, and I think again there's going to be a lot of connections. But one of the things that fascinates me is the way in which you are you identify the way in which he uses structural and formal characteristics of his compositions to denote anti-commercialism, and then exploits that as a selling point of his music as well. You're clearly conscious of the contradictions, and yet I get the impression that although the jury is still out, they're heading towards a majority verdict that this is true authenticity, even if it's synthesized.
Yeah, of course, authenticity is in the the eyes and the ears of audience members too, right? So we can never fully know. But I mean, I certainly think that he's trying to portray authenticity in the way that he goes about describing his music, and also in the compositional choices that he makes. Yeah.
That's great. I mean, there's so many themes in that we want to pick up later. You know, obviously authenticity, the notion of music, electronic dance music being unmediated, and that is a really a beautifully paradoxical concept as well. So I'm going to move on, because I think I'd like to open up the discussion later and make those connections in the conversation. Yeah. So Tristan, can I ask you to talk about your chapter, please?
Yeah, sure thing. So like I said before, I also wrote about deadmau5. My chapter is basically divided into 3 sections, and each of the sections use deadmau5 to talk about larger electronic music trends. The first talks about more technological developments, which to me is sort of the framework that we can talk about any electronic music, right, since its inception. It turns out deadmau5 has been at the forefront of a lot of the technical developments throughout the years. And in fact, his very genesis comes about as a result of technology. The essay uses his forays into all sorts of digital media as a sort of example of how electronic music is connecting with these different forms, from interacting on social media to he was one of the first people on Twitch, even before he was live streaming, even a year before Twitch began, to his partnership with video games, as well as virtual reality franchises, which we're seeing video games and music get more and more in bed together as the years go on. And today, deadmau5 is investigating NFTs, which I didn't write about in my essay, but it's come about certainly within the last few months. It's really taken the musical and the art world by storm, as I think everybody in sort of March saw of this year. But he actually dropped 100,000 worth of NFTs in December of 2020. So it shows him again to be ahead of the curve. The second section then talks about the criticism that electronic music has sort of encountered throughout the decades, which ties in with deadmau5's criticism of his own genre. You know, a lot of people, you know, see another side of him outside of the music as this kind of social media person, right? He has his digital self as compared to his album or live self. Mostly electronic music contends with the criticism that it's not live enough, and that it therefore is somehow not real music, right? Musicians have combated this criticism by incorporating traditional instruments, even if it's just a keyboard or, you know, or just pulling some knobs and sliders and stuff like that. And they've also combated this by employing ever more elaborate light shows, let's say. No one's been at a live show, of course, in over a year now, but the increased move of producers to online performance streams has taken place in this sphere. And as the chapter talks about in its first section, he's been at the forefront of that. He's super open with like live streaming a lot of his stuff. And then the last kind of, I think, dovetails a bit with Jeremy's thesis, where it concludes with a discussion of musician authenticity, which is something deadmau5 clearly has struggled with. And this is kind of goes with the second section as well. That said, the concept of selling out in the new music economy, like 2010 onwards, doesn't really apply. You see it kind of shrink away. Whereas in the 90s, you know, it was a real sense of derision that was aimed at artists that they were selling out. Looking into the future, as streaming revenue essentially guarantees that any musician will get compensated unfairly, this term will increasingly, I think, become antiquated. Tied to this trend are, again, strategies musicians pursue in order to get paid what they're worth, like becoming their own street team by offering merchandise or like selling sample packs like on Splice. For deadmau5, this meant aligning himself with more traditional forms of music, with classical music, actually. And he even did this very kind of staged classical performance with an orchestra, which is, you know, classical music being one of the most robust and respected forms of music in existence.
Again, I can see so many connections here. Clearly, it's fascinating that we've got these two different perspectives on deadmau5. And maybe your focus on the live experience is something that, I suppose my questions about the live and the social consumption, the live social consumption of electronic dance music, it raises these questions about consumption, about whether this is music to be listened to, or in the pre-COVID era, music to be danced to. That there's the physicality of that. It's about moving your body. And then there's the, I think when we start to look particularly at Stuart and Kamila's chapter, this notion of the social consumption within the club, within the dance space. Liveness and uniqueness of a social experience are something that I think we'll want to return to in discussion. But thank you. I'm going to move on to Chris. Would you tell us about your chapter?
Yeah, thank you, Des. So I'm also, like Tristan and Jeremy, I'm talking to an extent about the idea of EDM stardom. Not talking specifically about deadmau5, I'm afraid, but it was certainly relevant listening to the discussion from both of you about what you were saying about the artists such as deadmau5, because I feel that such artists like that represent the very kind of pinnacle, the peak of megastardom, which is actually a very small slice of the whole kind of EDM world. 99% of EDM practitioners are the people who don't reach that level of fame, who don't reach that level of celebrity status. And I think it's really important to acknowledge the ways in which EDM is consumed on the kind of underground level. So my chapter explores the genre of electro swing, which is really interesting in terms of its positionality between these two approaches to stardom. If you look at kind of the dawn of jazz, the dawn of swing, 1920s, 30s, almost 100 years ago at this point, this was kind of the dawn of celebrity as we know it. People like Benny Goodman, Duke Ellington were, in a sense, the first stars of their day, the first celebrities. And yet this model of celebrity has kind of shifted as time has gone on. And I feel that as electronic dance music has progressed over the past 40, 50 years, depending on how you want to, position the start of it. A lot of the view of these practitioners, their view of celebrity status is perhaps more cynical, seeing the kind of artificiality of fame, looking at things like the whole dawn of reality television, the whole dawn of kind of manufactured pop music has meant that a lot of practitioners of electronic dance music don't necessarily want to approach stardom in the same way that perhaps those of the jazz era or certain contemporary artists such as deadmau5 would want to. So electro swing is kind of unusual, and it straddles sort of halfway between these two positions. And I feel that a lot of electro swing musicians kind of have to assess where their career is going to be positioned in terms of their approach to fame and their approach to stardom. By utilizing the music of celebrities that already have a massive name for themselves, these huge stars of the jazz and swing era, any acclaim that electro swing musicians generate must by definition always be shared with stars who have already made a career over the past 80, 90, 100 years, as I say. So electro swing produces a slightly different breed of musician who, by putting such influences on such an overt display and putting such things so obviously out into the world, they insist that any recognition they receive is sufficiently justified and not in the sense of a celebrity being a star just for the sake of being a star, but recognizing what's come before them and recognizing why those initial stars of the jazz swing era became stars in the way that they did, and hopefully getting a leg up in the same sense. So yeah, my chapter explores the ways in which that kind of feeling of stardom is explored by those electro swing artists, and the sort of differing perspectives you can get when viewing it through the sense of EDM or also through the sense of early jazz.
Yeah, I think that the notion of stardom has, the last few chapters have been around the notion of stardom. I think it'd be interesting as we come to talk to Stuart and to Kamila. I suppose my first experience of EDM was in the beginnings of the rave scene, the 1980s, which was very much, I think, an anti-stardom scene, very much a sense that it was a community and an equal community, that there wasn't people were that nobody was a star and everyone was a star.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone was a star, and that was the kind of, I suppose, that came from the club culture of New York, and also perhaps from the hippie movements of the 1970s and the I suppose bands like Hawkwind and the festival bands. So there's a kind of a tension between the notion of stardom and this egalitarian sense that was in the early days of electronic dance music. And I guess I think that might be worth coming back to in later discussion.
Mm.
And in fact, it might be something that Stuart would like to pick up on now as he talks about his chapter.
I may well do. So you just made me think then, what was my first experience of electronic dance music? And I'm going to go back before the rave scene to about 1983, 1984, Morgan Kahn's Street Sounds label, when he had the Electro series of albums out. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that. But this was a fusion of hip hop and electronic music, artists like Run DMC and Mantronix, Arthur Baker, and so forth. And that was my first taste of electronic music, which piqued my interest because I loved it. As soon as I heard it, I knew it was something that I wanted to be into, and I continued to be into that. So to get an opportunity to contribute to a book like this has been fantastic because it's allowed me to sort of think back through my own history with music and my interaction from an autoethnographic perspective as I've put the chapter together for the things I've wanted to include, which I thought were important because I saw them develop at the time. And I've focused it on the city where I've lived since 1997, which is Leeds. I've been visiting Leeds for gigs since the late 1980s, early 1990s, probably about, 88, 89. The Duchess of York was a legendary venue in Leeds. Not known for dance music, but that was how I became sort of synonymous with Leeds. I'm from a town called Barnsley, which is not too far from Leeds. For those that don't know, it's about 20 miles, 30 kilometres, but that might not seem a long distance, but in the 1980s and 1990s, that was a long distance. It was a long distance geographically when you couldn't afford transport, and it was a long distance politically when different neo-tribes existed in the cities who didn't want you on their patch. So if they heard my accent in Leeds in the 1980s, I would very often be told that I wasn't welcome in the venues where I was. On more than one occasion, I've got off the train and almost felt like getting back on the train again from the first interaction that I had with somebody. And so Leeds was a very different place in the 1980s, early 1990s. Leeds was an aggressive city. It's an ex-industrial city. There was massive racial tensions. There was divides in the communities. And the rave scene coming together in 1980s, it broke this down, and people from different backgrounds and different communities, people with right-wing politics started to white guys with right-wing politics would start to hang around with Afro-Caribbean communities and in those kinds of venues because ecstasy happened and it broke down the barriers, and people took ecstasy and people danced to the music that was coming out. The new experimental music, house music, was new, it was fresh. It was fused with a lot of alternative music, so the indie dance era, which was, definitely more synonymous with Manchester than it was with Leeds, but it spilled across the Pennines. And what happened in Lancashire and in Manchester seemed to happen in Leeds not long afterwards. And a lot of this was carried through by the guys that were involved in the Leeds service crew, the football hooligan firm, who had, enemies on the other side of the Pennines who became their friends when they all took and danced together. And so what they witnessed on the other side of the Pennines in disused warehouses and in those sorts of spaces spread to Leeds. And Leeds developed a rave scene with different prongs, I call it. There was So I was part of the alternative rave scene. So when I first went to raves in Leeds, I would be in the Woodhouse and Hyde Park area, which was more hippie-ish, more artisan, more alternative music. It wasn't just about electronic music; it was a bit more of a fusion. And then in the Chapeltown area, you had the Shebeens, which was the Afro-Caribbean community. So these were the illegal drinking dens, which had been turned into informal club spaces. So like, for example, 148 Chapeltown Road was called the 148 Theatre Club. And these spaces became popularized, usually in the early days through reggae music, but that became house music. And so people started to explore those as venues that were different outside of the city centre. And then the third prong was the guys that were in South Leeds, the ex-industrial areas, a lot of working class lads and lasses who wanted to get together on a weekend and just dance and party, and not have to think about city centre prices, city centre politics, city centre dress codes and all those sorts of things. So warehouses in South Leeds are where the raves sprung up, in that part of the city. And as people, as the law clamped down on the rave scene, it made it more difficult to have, raves in houses and raves in warehouses. And entrepreneurs, that attended these venues sort of looked around and thought, I could put this in a city centre nightclub and make a fortune. And essentially that's what happened in Leeds. The entrepreneurs came along, the entrepreneurs who themselves were alternative ravers kind of looked and thought, you know what, there's some money to be made here. And they went into the city centre, and the rave scene became polished and clean, and dress codes were applied, and men in straight trousers were the theme of the day. Trainers were banned. You had to wear nice shoes, no hats, no beanie hats, no nothing like that. All the things that you saw at raves was gone. The rave scene became an elitist scene in Leeds city centre. It became for the beautiful people only. And this was massively against the ethos of what the rave scene was about. The rave scene was never about that elitism. It was about togetherness on the dance floor, peace, love, unity, all those sorts of things. So then small independent branches begin to emerge, and other scenes begin to emerge from that. New kinds of music get latched onto: jungle, drum and bass, dubstep, bassline. And smaller alternative communities then sort of rewoke the rave scene outside of the city centre. So the city centre was the place to be for a long period, but then it became untrendy, it became expensive, it became blatantly commercial, it became more about alcohol than it did about dancing. And so the smaller communities that didn't, that wanted to be themselves, that didn't want to dress up, they wanted to dress how they wanted to dress to be able to dance, started to then take over the alternative spaces again, and the rave scene re-emerged. And I'm going on a little bit, I understand, but the legacy of all of this is now a really healthy, unofficial rave scene, which takes place in house parties in the LS6 area of Leeds, which, it's massive. It's a huge thing. We're talking about companies that have set up around houses. We've got people knocking on doors and saying, we know that you've got 7 bedrooms in a massive basement. Can we hire your house for the weekend? Here's £2,000, clear all your stuff out. We're going to bring in door staff. We're going to bring in DJs, blah, blah, blah. We'll clean up your house afterwards and you can have it back. And this is happening every single weekend in Leeds. And, and it's turned these spaces back into something which, it's cool. And the kids don't want to go to the city centre. It's not trendy anymore. So the venues that they want to go to now are in the warehouses which are outside the city centre, or in the houses in Headingley. And, they can do what they want to do. They can be free to do what they want to do. They can take balloons. They can do what they want to do. And they don't have the fear of people that are drunk, that can become aggressive when, the drugs that people are taking at these parties are generally party drugs, which make people happier and want to be together. And to cut a long story short, that's my chapter. So,
thank you, Stuart. Kamila, before you talk about your chapter, perhaps it'd be interesting for you to compare the Manchester city centre scene with Stuart's account of Leeds. Is that?
Yeah, that's really interesting about the city centre, and it kind of links into my chapter too, because I feel like the city centre kind of has a more positive role in Manchester's club culture, in that, so the focus of my chapter, a lot of women DJs, older women DJs, and for them, those spaces are actually where they often get gigs, where they get most of their work, and actually are spaces where sometimes they, aren't as hassled, as clubs. So yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I wonder. Yeah, an interesting comparison, but yeah.
Yeah, but to move on to the chapter, I'm sorry, I kind of steered you off course there, Kamila.
No, that's fine. Yeah, so basically, my chapter is about ageism and sexism. And while there's been an increasing amount of research into women's role in electronic dance music, and there's some pockets of research on aging clubbers, there isn't so much on aging female DJs and their experiences of sexism and ageism. So that's kind of why I wanted to look into that. The other reason was I wrote 2 articles, I think in 2018 and 19, about ageism, and also women who feel they've been written out of Manchester's acid house history. So I kind of wanted to take that further and look at whether in Manchester this issue of ageism and sexism is perhaps more prevalent than in the wider club scene. And I guess it's important here to also note that ageism doesn't seem to be taken as seriously as other forms of discrimination in club culture. It seems to be quite a new thing that's being explored by journalists and academics. So to kind of get my chapter started, I had a look at research into Manchester's creative industries, and some of the research that I looked at was saying that basically Manchester's kind of hangover of a male-dominated music industry has impacted the creative industries now. So I guess I'm talking about the Hacienda, era, Manchester, and even its indie history. So and then also I was kind of looking at the male-dominated local government of Manchester, and kind of how that's kind of also reflected in the upper echelons of its club culture. So my hypothesis was that Manchester is likely more, ageist and sexist. And to kind of test this, I interviewed 7 older women DJs, and so they were between the ages of 39 and 57. And some of them actually started their careers on the acid house scene. In fact, one of them in this chapter was the DJ that I interviewed for that acid house article. She's called DJ Paulette. But others were women who'd started their careers more recently, kind of got into DJing in their 40s or 50s even. So it was like a really big spread. And as I said, I was kind of expecting them to say, yes, really sexist, and ageist, because that's kind of what I'd heard in interviews that I did for the journalistic articles. But actually, the answers were really mixed. And the things that did come through, though, was that most of these DJs didn't DJ full time, but the reasons were varied. So some of them, for example, Kath McDermott, who started her career at the Club Night Flesh in the Hacienda, said that she'd always felt that she'd had imposter syndrome, and therefore she never took it as, a serious career choice from the beginning. So even though she was successful, she was actually helping promote the Club Night Fresh and was making good money. She didn't, think to do it full time. But most of the women cited a lack of opportunity to earn enough money as a reason not to DJ full time. And that seemed to reflect research that I did into women DJs more generally. Also, some of them cited motherhood as a reason to either pause DJing, stop DJing, or also as a reason they were kind of not welcome on the dance floor. Some of them got, would kind of get shamed for being mothers who are DJs, or get heckled. I mean, one of the kind of DJs I interviewed is from a collective called Disco Mums. So they kind of embraced that criticism and kind of took it, made fun of it. But yeah, so some of them kind of found it difficult. And basically, most of them had experienced sexism and or ageism. A lot of women cited the age 40 as being kind of past it and being told they're past it, getting less opportunities. Although some also said that 40 was kind of a time where they got taken more seriously, got some respect. There was also one DJ who's kind of seen like as a mother figure to clubbers, especially on the gay scene. And then there were different ways that they kind of combated, these experiences. So most of them started their own nights, run their own nights basically, or came together to run an event. And often it was like women only event. So there was this event, and there's still ongoing annually, called Suffragette City. And that was almost kind of a response to this, obliterating women from the history of Manchester's club culture history. And then others such as DJ Paulette. First, she kind of left the city and became a DJ elsewhere. She went to France. But since she's come back to Manchester, she's kind of been vocal in the press and calling out, club spaces such as the Warehouse Project for not putting enough women on the lineup, and especially not putting on enough older women DJs. And then I also found that the more these issues are talked about, the more the women kind of grew in confidence and found solidarity. So even since I wrote the ageism article, one of the DJs said, that really got people messaging me and saying, it's great that you're DJing, and I want to DJ as an older woman. So, but the other thing that came through was they kind of said that, for real change to happen in Manchester and elsewhere is for there to be more women in positions of power, and, there aren't. And kind of looking to the future, I was kind of wondering whether in a post-COVID world, there might be more opportunities for women, and older women in particular. And I feel that maybe there might be, because clubs seem to be kind of looking towards, employing more local DJs, not focusing so much on the stars. But potentially, as we've seen with the Liverpool clubs, the big event recently, there's kind of a notion of playing it safe, having DJs that people already know. So I don't know if that might be replicated as clubs start to reopen in Manchester and elsewhere.
Thank you. That you kind of brought us back to this question of stars, and maybe that could be, one of the first things we talk about. To what extent, I'm going to throw this open to anyone who wants to leap into the Zoom. To what extent is the notion of stardom a difficult concept for EDM? To what extent? I'll perhaps just go a little further. To what extent is it in tension with the DNA of EDM, if I can put it in that way, like communitarian ethos from which the EDM culture seemed to spring?
I can chip in. Actually, also on behalf of the author who is not covered here, I think maybe the conclusion from all these chapters about stardom is that stardom happens whether the DJs or producers want it to happen or not. Simply, if you are very good, you will be eventually recognized and you will come to terms with it. The author, one of the author, Melanie Ptacek, wrote about Avicii in this context. But I think what also, maybe I slightly digress, but her chapter was largely about stardom in EDM and problems which it brings, particularly mental health problems. And in her case, she drew attention to work of these stars and wider community of electronic dance artists who often have to work so hard to often make their living, and who suffer so much. And this somehow brings me to what was discussed previously in the previous panel, that I have a sense that it will get worse in post-COVID future. So there will be less the case, about burnout, maybe from being a star, but there will be probably more problems on the way to stardom, because the road will be so long due to, for example, so many tracks released on Spotify, and finding somehow the way to promote oneself effectively.
Yeah.
I could jump in with a couple of things here. Ewa, just to speak to your last point, there was just a report that was published about DJs and how often they take plane rides to gigs. Like they might get on a plane several times a week just to play one gig and come back, which I think directly ties in with how, the live culture and performance culture leads to this kind of burnout. So actually, I think in the post-COVID world, we might be seeing a bit of a flip where maybe you take one plane ride, but then you play 3 gigs in a city, back to back, on different nights, or, maybe you could play more local gigs. So it might actually kind of, in post-COVID, as we're thinking about, also climate change and, plane rides obviously being a big contributor to that it could actually help mediate that. Leslie, you spoke earlier about this kind of anti-stardom, and I think it's critical to talk about how electronic music in particular bucks the conventions of conventional stardom. And by conventional, I'm mainly talking about stardom that we've sort of seen in like rock and pop, and, as we talked about, the swing eras, right? You have this kind of deliberate anonymity that I think you touched on, Leslie, where artists choose to not hide behind, but kind of conceal themselves behind this kind of blank CDs that are just being sent out. There was an analysis in my essay goes into this as well, how we see Deadmau5 and others like Daft Punk employ masks to deliberately not only create a performative space, but to conceal their true identities. So it kind of, it sort of rocks against these kind of conventional methods of stardom. So I think it's important to note how electronic music sort of reconfigures our notions of stardom as well.
Yeah, again, one of the authors who couldn't be here, Andrew Fry, his chapter looks at, it speculates a future in which artificial intelligence is the creator of electronic dance music. And that might, but then it's always possible to create animated or virtual reality characters who could become stars as avatars in the place of the electronic, the artificial intelligence producer. Would anyone else?
To continue this conversation of anonymity, I think it's important to mention that one tradition in EDM is performing under multiple different names as well. And Deadmau5 has done that in some other names performing as well. However, it's this tension between, do I want to be so anonymous that I'm not recognized for my work and that I don't make any money, right? So I think it's this tension that all artists have. And it's interesting to think about how performers and producers can choose to put themselves out there in a very visible way or choose not to, right?
I'm aware that Tony's been monitoring questions that have been coming in on the YouTube channel. Do you want to kind of put some of those to the panel now, Tony?
Well, I can. I mean, there's a few comments really. Shall I quickly run through them? So, Warehouse Project exclusive, yeah. So I think here one of the things that I suspect one of the comments triggered was playing more gigs in one location is potentially problematic because of exclusivity, and the bookers aren't there's so many forces at play here, clearly. So this idea that if you're going to pay a lot of money to book a particular star, that they'll be playing down the road or doing another gig is, there's tensions existing there. I think also, again, the idea of anonymity, another force at play is this idea that the distinctive tools, or sometimes referred to as shticks or gimmicks, contribute to the fact, with the examples of Daft Punk and Deadmau5, they became, there are a number of particular techniques or tools that, whilst protecting identity or obscuring, they serve to, propagate the fame as well. So there's always this sort of yin and yang thing, isn't there? There's always these sort of, and again, that idea of talking about the dominant cultures and the subcultures, again, in particularly in Stuart's sort of work. So there's, all of these interesting things. But so that was a comment from Danny Brown about the exclusivity contracts. Also being killer for small promoters as well. This idea that the bigger you are, the deeper your pockets, you're locking out, not just, actually we've experienced this a lot in the UK with, using the EDM as in, this book's about electronic dance music in a broader sense, but this sort of commoditization, a very commercial aspects of it, of EDM, where it's the amount of money that's being paid to the DJs for playing in Vegas and so on, the other sort of, centers for EDM, have actually pushed a lot of them out of the price range of the smaller environments. So, I mean, a lot of the things I'm saying are sort of more about the sort of commercial manifestation. But thanks, Danny Brown, for that question. He's also saying most of the big festivals nowadays have 9 out of 10 have the same 9 out of 10 names on every bill. So that's the sort of maybe the notion that chances aren't being taken as much with the bookings. Or that's certainly for the larger events.
I think Stuart pointed out a phenomenon, which is that when that kind of monopoly situation starts to occur, and when there's a kind of saturation and closing down of diversity within mainstream music culture, we start to see outbreaks of rebellion at the edges, and that it's forced out into other spaces, other areas, which is where EDM began, of course.
Yeah. I think there's another comment that an observation from Rich Anderson that in Liverpool, a lot of the announced DJ performances, many of them are from a more local base. We had Simba Selector applauding Mr. Moss, I think, and happy about the northern contribution to dance music in England is not being overlooked as it commonly is. And we had a question, Rich Anderson also said, mentioned Morley, Orbit.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and we had, just to sort of try and, I'm nearly through them all now, folks. Danny Brown asking Stuart, do you think we could see a resurgence of rave culture after COVID, a third summer of love?
I think it's absolutely. Look how keen people are to get out now and party. It's literally people chomping at the bit. Is there going to be the capacity in terms of legal venues and legal spaces to do it? Probably not, if we're still looking at some social distancing measures. So all the ingredients are there for the parties to happen, especially if we have a good dry summer. And that's what the people want. It's what the government doesn't want. As they know, a good dry summer with hot weather leads to trouble. But and that's so this is the summer coming up now. So let's see what happens. Yeah, it'll be very interesting times. It's certainly been an interesting period to live through. That's for sure.
Maybe if I can also chip in with a slightly different comment, as somehow happened that most of these presentations were on Anglo-American world, while the theme which runs through the book is that it's a global phenomenon, and actually electronic dance music is a genre which gave visibility to other places. and both in terms of what was going on, in terms of stars like Avicii, but also even in terms of influence on, I would say, discourse about EDM. So, for example, we use this term, but in Germany, the prevailing term is techno. In France, the term electro is used in context which will be not recognized in the Anglo-American world. So this is also something which is worth considering. As all in all, we wanted to emphasize in the book that EDM, despite having stars and so on and so forth, is rather egalitarian genre, democratic genre, and let's hope that it will stay this way in this post-COVID world. Thank you.
On that hopeful note, that positive, optimistic note, I think we've just about run out of time, slightly run over time, but it's been a fascinating discussion, and I hope people have got a sense of just what actually a diverse range of perspectives on electronic dance music. There are not all of our authors could be here today, and we haven't had time to talk about some of those other chapters. Ever talked about the way in which the words electronic dance music, the name electronic dance music is, or EDM, is in itself a disputed term, or a term that is used in different ways in different countries. And there were actually two of our chapters looked at that in different ways as well. But thank you all for being here, and thank you all for contributing to the book, which is out next month. So I'll say to each of you, Tony, obviously, great discussion earlier on.
Thank you, Les. Can I just chip in? It's such a good book. I have to say this. Everyone's chapters are incredibly insightful and valuable, and they provide a basis for so much more thought, and exploration. It's a great template for analysing and reflecting on this very important aspect of music, electronic dance music, and it's been a real pleasure working on it and seeing all of these chapters coming to fruition. I just really wanted to say that and sort of thank everyone personally. I just thought it was important to say it's a great book. People need to read it.
Thanks, Tony. Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you, Tristan, and thank you, Chris, and thank you, Stuart, and thank you, Kamila, and thank you, Ewa. It's been a great discussion, and I look forward to actually having a copy of the book in my hands, being able to read through the pages. So thank you, and good afternoon.
Thanks, everybody. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Les. Thanks, Ewa. Thanks, everyone.